The story starts with us, myself, my wife, and her best friend, who always seems to be around. I'm not the type of man to sugarcoat things, so let me get straight to it. I work in IT, a straightforward job that pays the bills, and my wife, Anna, works part-time at a local bookstore. We aren't a couple with flashy careers or overly romantic gestures, we're practical, and that works for us. Anna's friend, Kate, on the other hand, is more of a free spirit. She changes jobs frequently, always chasing whatever catches her interest. It's fine for her, I suppose, but I like stability and knowing where things stand. Anna is generally content with her job and our routine, or at least that's what I thought until she started talking about being bored. She said she wanted something new to keep her occupied, a hobby maybe. I remember her sitting at the kitchen table, complaining about how her days seemed repetitive. She mentioned how I had my video games, my way to unwind, but she couldn't find anything that really excited her. It wasn't her first time bringing it up, but this time I could sense that it was weighing on her more than usual. She didn't want just another craft project, she wanted something that would really make her days different. I could see she was getting frustrated, and even though I'm not the type to indulge in emotions, I knew I had to support her. I nodded, listened, and told her that she should definitely find something to keep herself entertained. I tried not to make it sound like it was for my benefit, it wasn't like I needed her out of my hair, but I wanted her to be satisfied. I told her, whatever you choose, just make sure it's something you'll stick with. Anna seemed to appreciate my words, though she still looked unsure. I think she expected me to come up with an idea right there and then, but I'm no magician. A few days passed, and she still hadn't found anything. Every evening, she would mention some new idea she'd read about online or heard from Kate. Pottery, yoga, knitting, all of them sounded good for about 5 minutes until she dismissed them as not really her thing. Frankly, I was beginning to wonder if she'd find anything at all. Anna wasn't lazy, but she was picky. She didn't want just any hobby, she wanted something that would excite her, something that she could commit to fully, and that's what made it difficult. One evening, I was watching some videos on YouTube, just killing time after work. Somehow, I stumbled upon a video of people riding horses. I don't even remember what led me there, but I watched it for a few minutes, and it struck me maybe this was something Anna would like. It wasn't a typical suggestion, not like yoga or knitting, and it had that bit of adventure she seemed to crave. I called her over, and she came to sit beside me, curious. I said, "Hey, what about horseback riding? You're always saying you want something different. This is definitely different." She looked at the screen, then at me, and I could see her eyes light up just a bit. It wasn't the usual half-hearted response I'd been getting from her lately. She seemed genuinely intrigued. "Horseback riding," she repeated, as if trying the idea on for size. I nodded and said, "Yeah, why not? It's outdoors, it's physical, and it's definitely not something you've done before." Anna smiled, and for the first time in days, it felt like we were getting somewhere. The next morning, she was still talking about it. That's how I knew she was serious. She started looking up local stables, checking prices, schedules, the whole 9 yards. I didn't mind, if it kept her happy and gave her something to look forward to, then great. It wasn't my kind of thing, but it didn't need to be. I told her I'd help cover the costs if it was something she really wanted to do. "Just go for it," I said, and that was that. It wasn't long before she found a place that offered lessons. She booked her first one for the upcoming weekend, and she was more excited than I had seen her in a while. Kate, of course, was all in, already planning to go with her and make it a girls' thing. That was fine by me. I figured if Kate was involved, at least Anna wouldn't be doing it alone, and maybe it would make her stick with it longer. Little did I know just how much this new hobby would change things between us. It was surprising, really, just how much Anna got into the horseback riding. She started going 3 times a week, and she never missed a session. Rain or shine, she was out the door and headed to the stables without hesitation. At first, I thought it was just a passing phase, something that would fizzle out like the pottery or yoga ideas. But this time, she was different. It was almost like she was hypnotized by it, as if nothing else mattered. She'd come back from her lessons talking non-stop about the horses, the techniques she was learning, and even the names of every horse at the stable. It wasn't like her to be this focused on one thing, but I figured it was good for her. She seemed happy, and that was what mattered. What I didn't expect was how much this hobby would consume her. She started changing her routine around it. She'd plan her entire week based on her riding schedule, which, to be honest, was a little strange. We couldn't even make plans for a weekend outing without her mentioning, "I need to be back by 4, I have a riding lesson." I just shrugged it off. If this was what made her happy, so be it. But after a few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She was a bit too invested, almost like she was obsessed. Still, I didn't see the harm. I figured everyone needs something that takes them away from the day-to-day monotony. For her, it was the horses. Then one day, I noticed something odd. Anna had this vibrator, one of those things she kept in her nightstand drawer. I never really paid much attention to it, it was her business, after all. But one evening, I happened to be looking for something in the drawer, and I realized it wasn't there. At first, I thought maybe she'd just moved it. No big deal, right? But the more I looked around, the more I realized it was just gone. I didn't think too much about it then, but it was strange. Usually, she kept all her toys in the same place, and now, it was nowhere to be found. A few days later, I was curious enough to ask her about it. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I just asked casually, "Hey, did you move that vibrator you used to keep in the drawer?" Anna looked up from whatever she was doing, and she didn't even flinch. She just said, "Oh, that?" I gave it to Kate. She's never tried one, and I figured she might as well have it. Her response was so casual that it almost made me feel stupid for asking. I mean, it made sense, I suppose. Kate was always curious about things, and if Anna wanted to help her friend out, who was I to judge? But something about it didn't sit right with me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the whole situation seemed off. I mean, who just gives away something like that? It's not exactly the kind of thing you pass around between friends. I let it go, though. I wasn't about to start a fight over something so trivial. If Anna said she gave it to Kate, then fine. I wasn't going to dwell on it. Still, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story. I tried not to think about it too much, but the thought kept creeping back into my mind. The next week, I started noticing little things. Anna was more secretive about her routine, always making sure she was ready to leave on time, never leaving any details out of place. It was odd, but I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, always questioning everything she did. So, I kept my mouth shut. I thought maybe I was just overthinking things. Maybe this was just what it looked like when someone was passionate about a hobby. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on. It wasn't just the vibrator, or the way she handled her time at the stables. It was her whole demeanor. She seemed different, more distant at times, but then overly enthusiastic when she talked about the stables. It was almost like she was living two lives, one with me and one with the horses. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that I was just imagining things. But deep down, I knew that something had changed, and I couldn't quite figure out what. It was around this time that I started feeling uneasy about the whole horseback riding thing. I didn't want to be the kind of guy who questioned his wife's hobbies, but there was something about the way she was acting that just didn't add up. I wanted to trust her, and for the most part, I did. But every now and then, I found myself wondering what exactly was going on at those stables. Was it just the horses, or was there something more? I didn't have any answers, but I knew I needed to keep my eyes open. I'll admit it, I was getting curious about what Anna was up to at the stables. It wasn't that I doubted her or anything like that, but she was spending so much time there, and she always seemed so energized when she got back. I started thinking that maybe it wouldn't be such a bad idea if I went along one day. I mean, I had never actually seen her on a horse. She talked about it all the time, and I figured it might be interesting to see what all the fuss was about. Plus, it would give me a better idea of what she did there 3 times a week. It was a thought that kept coming back to me, so one day I decided to bring it up. I asked her one evening, as casually as I could, if I could come along sometime to see her ride. I wasn't trying to make it sound like I was prying, just curious. She looked at me for a moment, and I could tell she wasn't thrilled with the idea. Anna gave a bit of a laugh and said, "I don't know if you'd enjoy it, honestly. It's just a lot of me riding in circles, working on technique. It's not that exciting." I could tell she was trying to downplay it, make it sound like it wasn't worth my time. I wasn't about to push, so I shrugged and said, "All right, if you think so." But the way she brushed it off, it just made me more curious. She must have realized that I wasn't entirely convinced, because she pulled out her phone and said, "Here, let me show you something." She opened her photos and showed me a picture of a pony. It was small, with a soft brown coat, and honestly, it looked kind of cute, not that I'd say that out loud. Anna smiled as she looked at the photo and said, "They just brought her in recently. Her name's Daisy. She's still getting used to the place, so I might be staying a bit longer at the stables to help out with her." There was a softness in her voice that I hadn't heard in a while, and I could tell she really liked the pony. I nodded, trying to show some interest. "Daisy, who?" "She looks all right," I said. Anna laughed and shook her head. "She's more than all right. She's adorable," she replied, clearly taken with the little creature. She started telling me about how Daisy was still a bit skittish and needed a lot of attention to get comfortable around people. It made sense, I guess. Animals need care, and if Anna was willing to put in the time, then good for her. But there was something about the way she talked about it, like it was more than just a hobby now. It was almost like she had a new responsibility, something that kept her going back again and again. She also mentioned that with Daisy around, she might end up staying later at the stable some days. She needs a lot of care, and sometimes it's just easier to stay a bit longer to make sure she's settled, Anna said. I nodded again, but I couldn't help but feel a bit left out. Not that I wanted to spend my evenings brushing a pony, but still. It felt like she was drifting into a world that I wasn't really a part of. I knew it wasn't intentional, and I didn't want to make it a big deal. But the more she talked about it, the more I realized just how much time she was spending at that place. After that conversation, I noticed that Anna seemed even more absorbed in her routine. She'd leave for the stables with a smile on her face, and when she came back, she'd talk about Daisy and how much progress they were making. I tried to keep up, asking questions here and there, but it was clear that this was her thing. She'd light up whenever she talked about the pony, and while I was glad she had something that made her happy, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the outside looking in. It wasn't like I was jealous of a pony, but it was hard not to feel a bit sidelined. One evening, I brought it up again, trying to sound as nonchalant as possible. "So, do you think I could come see Daisy sometime? Just to see what you've been up to?" Anna gave me a small smile, but there was something guarded in her eyes. "Maybe," she said. "But honestly, it's not that interesting. I'm just helping her get used to people. It's a lot of repetition." I could tell she wasn't exactly enthusiastic about the idea of me coming along. I let it drop again, not wanting to push her. But it only made me more curious. What was it about this place that she didn't want me to see? She kept showing me pictures, though. Every few days, she'd come home and pull out her phone, showing me new shots of Daisy or the other horses. I'd nod along, making the appropriate comments, but it wasn't the same as being there. It felt like she was giving me just enough to keep me from asking more questions. I didn't want to be the suspicious husband, always prying into her business, but it was hard not to wonder. I trusted Anna, but I also knew that something had changed. She was more guarded, more protective of this part of her life, and I couldn't quite figure out why. I tried to be supportive. I told her it was great that she was helping out with Daisy, that it was good she had something she was passionate about. And I meant it. I wanted her to be happy, and if this was what did it, then fine. But I also wanted to understand it better. I wanted to see her in that world, to know what it was that kept her going back, week after week. Maybe one day she'd let me in, but for now, I had to settle for the stories and the pictures, and the growing feeling that there was more going on than I knew. As the days went by, I started noticing that Anna was staying at the stables longer and longer. It wasn't just the usual "I'm helping out with Daisy" anymore. She'd leave in the late afternoon and wouldn't be back until well into the evening. It started to feel like she was slipping away from me, like her life at the stables had taken over everything else. And then there was her phone. I'd catch her smiling at the screen, biting her lip sometimes as she read something. It wasn't like her to be so absorbed in her phone, especially not when I was right there. It made me wonder. One evening, I decided to ask her about it. I didn't want to come off as accusatory, so I kept my tone light. "What's got you smiling so much at your phone lately?" I asked. Anna looked up at me, a little startled, then smiled again, almost sheepishly. "Oh, it's just Kate," she said. "She's always joking around, sending me funny stuff. You know how she is." I nodded, but I could tell there was more to it. Anna was being vague, and that wasn't like her. Usually, she'd share whatever was making her laugh, but this time, she just brushed it off. I pressed her a little, asking what kind of jokes Kate was sending. Anna gave a small shrug and said, "Oh, just some tips and tricks she's found about horse riding, and ways to make it more fun. It's not always exciting, you know." She smiled again, but it felt forced. I knew she was holding something back, but I didn't want to push too hard. I just said, "Well, maybe you can show me sometime." She looked away, almost like she was uncomfortable, and replied, "Yeah, maybe. Someday." Then she changed the subject. That night, after Anna had gone to bed, I found myself thinking about her behavior more and more. It wasn't just the late nights at the stables, or the way she smiled at her phone. It was the way she was acting distant, like there was something she didn't want me to know. I couldn't help it, I had to know what was going on. So, when I was sure she was asleep, I took her phone. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed answers. I unlocked it and started scrolling through her messages. I found the chat with Kate easily enough. At first, it was just the usual stuff, jokes, pictures of horses, little comments about their time at the stables. But as I scrolled further, the messages started to change. They became more explicit, more detailed. My stomach turned as I read them. There were messages from Kate, giving Anna instructions, a guide, really, on how to satisfy herself using a horse. They were talking about Daisy, about what they could do with the pony. It was sickening. I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me. This couldn't be real. This was my wife, the woman I married, the person I thought I knew better than anyone. And here she was, talking about something so twisted, something I could never have imagined. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the messages, each one worse than the last. It was like a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of anger, disgust, and sadness. This was it. There was no coming back from this. Our marriage was over. There was no way I could stay with someone like that, no way I could live with a person capable of something so depraved. But as much as I wanted to walk away, I also felt a burning need for something else, revenge. I couldn't just let her get away with this. She had lied to me, betrayed me in the worst possible way. I wanted her to pay for what she'd done, to feel the same kind of pain she'd caused me. I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it, but I knew one thing for sure: I was going to that stable. I was going to see for myself what was happening there, and I was going to make sure she regretted every single thing she'd done. The next day, I started putting my plan together. I acted like everything was normal, like I didn't know a thing. Anna was her usual self, getting ready to head out to the stables, smiling as she kissed me goodbye. It took everything in me not to show what I was feeling, not to let the anger and disgust boil over. I just smiled back, told her to have a good time, and watched as she walked out the door. As soon as she was gone, I started getting ready. I knew where the stables were, and I knew it was time for me to see what was really going on there. It was just another evening, or at least that's how it seemed. Anna told me she wouldn't be back until late because they were preparing for some upcoming competition. She said she'd be at the stables until midnight, and that Kate would be there too, so it wouldn't be boring. She said it all so casually, as if it was just another day. But to me, it was anything but casual. I knew this was the chance I'd been waiting for. I had to find out what was really going on there, and tonight was the night to do it. There was no hesitation. Once she left the house, I grabbed my keys and got ready to follow her. I watched from the window as she walked out of the house, her riding bag slung over her shoulder, the same smile on her face. She didn't have the slightest clue that I was onto her. I waited a few minutes after she drove off before I got into my car. My heart was pounding, and my mind was racing, but I stayed focused. I had to see it for myself. There was no turning back now. I followed her at a safe distance, keeping my headlights off when I could, making sure she wouldn't notice me in her rearview mirror. I knew the route she was taking, I had looked it up earlier, and I had a pretty good idea where the stables were. The drive felt longer than it actually was. Every turn she made, I kept my distance, trying not to lose her but also not wanting her to see me. I kept my eyes glued to her taillights, making sure she was always within sight. Eventually, she turned off onto a smaller road, one that led directly to the stables. I slowed down even more, giving her plenty of space. I could see the glow of the stable lights in the distance, a soft yellow in the otherwise dark countryside. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. This was it. I had to be careful, but I was ready for whatever I might find. I parked my car a good distance away from the main gate, behind some bushes where I wouldn't be easily spotted. I watched as Anna pulled up to the gate, got out of her car, and walked inside. The gate was left slightly ajar, probably to make it easier for people coming in and out. Once she was out of sight, I stayed in my car for a moment, collecting my thoughts. My mind was racing, a mix of anger, fear, and anticipation. I had no idea what I was about to walk into, but I knew I needed to see it for myself. After a few moments, I quietly opened my car door and stepped out. The cold night air hit me, and I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I looked around, making sure there was no one else nearby. The area was quiet, the only sounds were the faint rustling of leaves and the distant whinny of a horse. I moved slowly, keeping to the shadows as I made my way towards the gate. I needed to be cautious. I didn't want anyone to see me, not yet. I wasn't ready to confront Anna without knowing exactly what was going on. The gate was just up ahead, and I could see the faint glow of the stable lights beyond it. My heart was pounding in my chest, each step bringing me closer to whatever truth awaited me. I approached the gate carefully, making sure not to make any noise. I peered through the gap, trying to get a sense of what was happening inside. The lights from the stables illuminated part of the yard, but I couldn't see anyone from where I was standing. I had to get closer, but I needed to be careful. One wrong move, and Anna would know I was there. I paused at the gate, taking another deep breath. This was it. I was about to cross the line, to step into her world and see for myself what she had been hiding. I wasn't sure what I was going to find, but I knew one thing for certain, there was no going back now. I pushed the gate open just enough to slip through, making sure not to let it creak. I moved inside, staying close to the fence, my eyes scanning the area for any sign of Anna. The stable lights were brighter now, and I could hear faint voices coming from somewhere deeper inside. I stayed still for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the light and listening for any sounds that might give away Anna's location. The stables were quiet, the only movement coming from the occasional flick of a horse's tail or the rustle of hay. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, and I knew that whatever happened next, I had to stay calm. I had come this far, and I wasn't about to turn back now. I took another step forward, my eyes fixed on the source of the light, and prepared myself for whatever I was about to find. I slipped through the gate, careful not to make any noise. The stable grounds were mostly quiet, the only sound being the rustling of hay and the occasional snort of a horse. I moved slowly, keeping close to the shadows, my eyes scanning the area for any sign of Anna. The stable lights illuminated parts of the yard, and I could see movement inside the barn. As I got closer, I noticed Anna and Kate standing near one of the stalls, their backs to me. They were talking, their voices too low for me to make out exactly what they were saying. I stayed hidden, watching from a distance. I saw Anna reach into her bag and pull something out. My stomach turned when I realized what it was, the vibrator she had claimed to give to Kate. The one that had mysteriously disappeared from our drawer. She had lied to me, and now here it was, right in front of me. I watched as she handed it to Kate, who took it with a smile. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Why was she bringing it here? Why was she lying about it? I couldn't wrap my head around it, but I knew one thing, this was not normal. They continued talking, and I stayed low, moving carefully along the side of the barn. I needed to get closer, to see what they were planning. They started walking towards one of the pens, and I followed at a distance, keeping myself hidden. Anna picked up a bag of feed as they made their way towards Daisy's pen. It all looked innocent enough, but after everything I'd seen, I knew there was more to it. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt a mix of anger and fear that I couldn't shake. I had to know what they were doing. As I made my way around the side of the barn, I suddenly felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. It was the watchman, an old man with a kind face, though right now he looked more confused than anything else. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low but firm. "This is private property. You're not supposed to be here." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. There was no point in lying now. I had to tell him the truth. "Listen," I said, keeping my voice low, "my wife's in there. I think something's going on. I found some messages on her phone, and I'm worried. I think they might be doing something wrong with the horses." The old man's eyes widened slightly, and he glanced towards the barn where Anna and Kate had disappeared. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at me, as if trying to decide whether to believe me or not. After a moment, he nodded. "I've seen them here, those two," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They've been acting strange. That one friend of hers, she's here all the time, even when your wife isn't. I thought it was odd, but I didn't think much of it." He paused, then looked at me, his expression softening. "All right. Let's go take a look. But you'd better be right about this." I nodded, relieved that he was willing to help. We moved quietly together, making our way towards the pen where Anna and Kate had gone. The old man walked with a slight limp, but he was surprisingly quiet, his steps barely making a sound on the dirt path. I could feel my heart pounding, every step bringing us closer to whatever truth awaited us. I didn't know what we were about to find, but I knew it wouldn't be good. I had seen enough to know that something was very wrong. As we approached the pen, we could hear their voices again, a mix of laughter and hushed conversation. The watchman glanced at me, his expression grim, and I nodded. We needed to see this through. Whatever was happening, we were going to find out, and I was going to make sure Anna understood just how far she had fallen. The old man and I exchanged a look, and then we moved closer, ready to confront whatever was waiting for us in that pen. We reached the edge of the pen, moving slowly and keeping ourselves hidden behind the fence. I peered through a gap, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw them. I couldn't believe my eyes. There was Anna, lying on the ground, completely exposed, her legs spread wide, and the pony was there, eating the feed she had scattered between her thighs. Kate was also there, completely naked, her hands roaming over the pony's back as if this were the most natural thing in the world. It was like something out of a nightmare, a scene so twisted and wrong that I could barely process what I was seeing. For a moment, I just froze. My mind went blank, and all I could do was stare. This was my wife, the woman I had loved, the person I had shared my life with, and now she was here, doing something so depraved, so unimaginable, that it made me sick to my stomach. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, and I had to steady myself against the fence to keep from collapsing. The old man beside me let out a soft gasp, his face pale as he took in the scene. I could see the shock in his eyes, the disbelief. He looked at me, as if to confirm that what he was seeing was real. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling as I unlocked the screen. I needed proof. No one would believe this unless they saw it with their own eyes. I hit record, holding the phone steady as I captured every detail. Anna's face, her body, the pony, Kate's twisted smile as she stroked the animal. It was all there right in front of me, and I wanted them to know that I had seen everything. I felt a cold, hard anger building inside me, a rage that I had never felt before. They had lied to me, betrayed me in the worst possible way, and now I was going to make sure they paid for it. I kept recording, the seconds stretching into what felt like an eternity. The old man stood beside me, his face twisted in disgust, but he didn't say anything. He just watched, his eyes fixed on the scene in front of us. I could hear Anna laughing softly, her voice carrying through the still night air, completely unaware that her world was about to come crashing down. I felt my jaw clench, my teeth grinding together as I fought to keep my emotions in check. I had seen enough. It was time to end this. I stopped recording and slipped my phone back into my pocket. I looked at the old man, and he gave me a small nod. We stepped forward, moving out from behind the fence, and I took a deep breath before shouting, my voice echoing across the yard. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Anna's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. Kate turned, her face going pale as she realized they had been caught. There was a moment of silence, a heartbeat where everything seemed to stand still, and then Anna started to cry, her voice breaking as she tried to speak. This isn't what it looks like," she stammered, her eyes filling with tears. "Please, just let me explain," but I didn't want to hear it. I had seen enough, and there was nothing she could say that would change what she had done. I turned away, my heart pounding, and started walking back towards the gate. I could hear her calling after me, her voice cracking as she begged me to stop, but I didn't look back. I didn't want to see her face, didn't want to hear her lies. The old man followed me, his face grim as he kept pace beside me. He didn't say anything, and I was grateful for that. There was nothing left to say. I reached my car, my hand still shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I got in, started the engine, and drove away, the image of what I had just seen burned into my mind. I felt a hollow emptiness inside me, a sense of loss that I couldn't describe. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't even recognize. There was no going back now. This was the end. I drove home in silence, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. I could still see the image of Anna in that pen, lying there with the pony, Kate standing beside her. It was burned into my mind, a vision I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, as I tried to focus on the road ahead. I felt a mixture of anger, disgust, and sadness, emotions that threatened to overwhelm me, but I couldn't let them. Not yet. I had things to do, and I couldn't afford to fall apart now. When I got home, I went straight to the bedroom. I didn't hesitate, didn't give myself time to think. I grabbed a suitcase from the closet and started throwing Anna's clothes into it. I wasn't careful, didn't fold anything neatly. I just wanted it all out of my sight. Everything that reminded me of her, everything that belonged to her, I stuffed it all into the suitcase. I moved through the house like a man possessed, my anger driving me forward. I didn't care if I broke things, didn't care if I made a mess. I just wanted her gone. Once the suitcase was packed, I dragged it to the front door and threw it outside. I went back for more, grabbing whatever I could find that was hers, shoes, bags, anything that she had left behind. I piled it all on the front lawn, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me, my body trembling with rage. I didn't care who saw, didn't care what the neighbors might think. They could all see the truth for all I cared. Anna had betrayed me, and there was no coming back from that. It wasn't long before I heard the sound of a car pulling up. I knew it was her even before I looked. I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed over my chest, as Anna got out of the car. Her face was red, her eyes puffy from crying, but there was something else there too, anger. She looked at the pile of her things on the lawn, then at me, her eyes narrowing. She stormed up to the door, her voice rising as she started to speak. "What the hell is this?" she yelled, her hands gesturing towards the mess I had made. I didn't flinch, didn't move. I looked her in the eye, my voice cold as I spoke. "It's over, Anna. You're not coming back here. We're done." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as if she was trying to find the right words. "You don't understand," she started, her voice cracking. "It wasn't what you think, I swear," but I cut her off, my anger boiling over. "I saw everything, Anna. Don't you dare stand there and lie to me again." My voice was louder than I intended, the words echoing off the walls of the empty hallway. Her face twisted in anger, and she took a step closer, her hands clenched into fists. "You had no right to follow me. No right to spy on me," she shouted, her eyes flashing with fury. I shook my head, my expression hard. "No right? You think I had no right to know what my own wife was doing? You think I had no right to know that I couldn't even finish the sentence." The words felt dirty, wrong, and I could feel the bile rising in my throat. "Get out, Anna. I'm done. I'm filing for divorce, and I don't want to see you again." She stared at me, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, I thought she was going to say something else, but then her shoulders slumped, and the fight seemed to drain out of her. She looked at the pile of her belongings on the lawn, then back at me, her eyes filled with tears. "You're really doing this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, my expression unchanging. "Yes. I'm really doing this. Now leave." She stood there for a moment longer, then turned and walked away, her footsteps heavy as she made her way back to the car. I watched as she drove off, her taillights disappearing into the night. I stood in the doorway, the cold air washing over me, and for the first time since I had seen her in that pen, I allowed myself to feel the weight of it all. The anger, the betrayal, the sadness, it all came crashing down on me, and I felt my knees weaken. I closed the door, leaning against it for support, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It was over. My marriage, my life as I had known it, was over. And there was no going back. After Anna left that night, I knew there was no turning back. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, meetings with lawyers, and moving on with my life. The divorce process was swift, I made sure of that. I wanted as little contact with Anna as possible. I wanted her out of my life, and I wanted her to face the consequences of what she had done. The memories of what I had seen at the stables haunted me, and I couldn't let it go without doing something about it. I needed closure, and I needed justice. One day, as I sat in the empty house that was once our home, I decided to take the next step. I took out my phone and scrolled through the videos, finding the one I had recorded that night. I watched it again, my stomach churning with a mixture of disgust and anger. This wasn't just about me anymore. What Anna and Kate were doing was wrong, and it needed to be stopped. I couldn't let them continue to do whatever they wanted without any consequences. It was time to make sure they faced the reality of their actions. I contacted the police, providing them with all the information I had, including the video. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew it was the right one. The officer I spoke to was shocked, his voice going quiet as I explained what I had witnessed. He asked me to send the video over, and I did, my hand steady as I attached the file and hit send. It was out of my hands now. I had done what I needed to do. Whatever happened next was up to the authorities, but at least I knew I had done my part. A few days later, I took another step. I contacted the stables, the place where Anna had spent so much of her time. I knew they had no idea what had been happening there, and they deserved to know. I emailed the video to them, along with a detailed explanation of what I had seen. I knew it would come as a shock to them, but they needed to know the truth. They needed to understand what kind of people they had allowed into their facility. I wasn't just going to let Anna continue her hobby as if nothing had happened. She didn't deserve that. The response from the stables was immediate. They were horrified, apologizing profusely and assuring me that they would take immediate action. They promised that Anna and Kate would no longer be allowed on the property, and that they would cooperate fully with any investigation. It was a small victory, but it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Knowing that Anna had lost the one thing she seemed to care about more than anything else gave me a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't much, but it was something. The police also followed up with me, letting me know that they were investigating the situation. They asked me more questions, and I answered them as best as I could. It wasn't easy to relive those moments, to talk about what I had seen, but I knew it was necessary. The officer assured me that they were taking the matter seriously, and that they would do everything they could to ensure that justice was served. It was a long process, and I knew it wouldn't be resolved overnight, but I was willing to wait. I wanted Anna and Kate to face the consequences of their actions. In the meantime, I focused on rebuilding my life. The house felt empty without Anna, but it was a relief to be free of her. I no longer had to deal with the lies, the deceit, the betrayal. I could finally breathe again, knowing that I had done everything I could to make things right. I knew it would take time to heal, but at least I was on the right path. I had taken control of the situation, and I had made sure that Anna couldn't hurt anyone else the way she had hurt me. There were days when the memories would still come back, the images of that night flashing through my mind. But each time they did, I reminded myself that I had done the right thing. I had stood up for myself, and I had made sure that Anna faced the consequences of her actions. It wasn't easy, and it didn't erase the pain, but it gave me a sense of closure. And that was enough for me to start moving forward, one day at a time. It was late in the evening when I heard a noise outside. At first, I thought it might just be an animal, maybe a stray cat knocking something over. But the noise persisted, loud thuds and the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. My stomach sank as I realized it was coming from the driveway. I rushed to the window and looked outside. There she was, Anna, standing by my car with something in her hand. I could see the glint of metal as she scraped it across the side of my car, her face twisted in anger. The glass of the passenger side window was shattered, shards glittering on the ground around her feet. My heart pounded as I watched her, my initial shock quickly turning into anger. She had no right to be here, no right to do this. She had already taken so much from me, and now she was trying to destroy what little I had left. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I grabbed my phone, dialing the police as I made my way to the door. I could feel the adrenaline surging through me, my body trembling with a mixture of anger and determination. I opened the door and stepped outside, my voice loud as I called out to her. Anna! What the hell do you think you're doing? She turned to face me, her eyes wild, her expression filled with rage. She didn't say anything, just glared at me, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the hatred. She looked like a person who had lost everything, and maybe she had. But that wasn't my fault. She had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. I wasn't about to let her take out her anger on me any longer. I moved towards her, my hands outstretched as I grabbed her wrists, forcing her to drop whatever she was holding. She struggled against me, her body twisting as she tried to break free, but I was stronger. I held her firmly, my grip unyielding. Let go of me, she screamed, her voice filled with fury. But I didn't let go. I wasn't going to let her continue this. I could hear the operator on the other end of the line, still connected, asking if I needed assistance. Yes, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos around me. I need the police. Now. Anna continued to struggle, her movements becoming more frantic as she realized I wasn't going to let her go. You ruined everything, she yelled, her voice breaking. You took everything from me. I looked at her, my expression hard. No, Anna. You did this to yourself, I replied, my voice cold. She stopped struggling for a moment, her eyes meeting mine, and I could see the pain there, the realization of what she had lost. But there was no sympathy left in me. Not after everything she had done. We stood there, locked in that moment, until I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Anna's eyes widened, and she tried once more to pull away, but I held her firmly. "It's over," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The police car pulled up, the lights flashing, and 2 officers got out, approaching us cautiously. I let go of Anna, stepping back as they took hold of her, her protests falling on deaf ears. One of the officers looked at me, asking if I was all right. I nodded, my eyes still on Anna, as they led her away. As they put her in the back of the police car, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. This was it. This was the end of the chaos she had brought into my life. She had crossed the line, and now she was facing the consequences. I watched as the car drove away, the red and blue lights fading into the distance. The night was quiet again, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the wind. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It was finally over. I turned back to the house, the broken glass crunching under my feet as I walked. There was a lot to clean up, both outside and in my own life. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could move forward. Anna was gone, and there was nothing left tying me to the past. I could finally start to rebuild, piece by piece, without the weight of her betrayal dragging me down. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew I could do it. And that was enough. Once the dust had settled, Anna eventually paid for the damages she had caused. She paid for the shattered car windows, the scratches on the paint, and any other repairs that had come out of her fit of rage. She had no choice but to face the consequences, and I made sure that everything was accounted for. The payments were a small price to pay compared to what she had done to my life, but it was a step towards closure. Not long after, I heard from mutual friends that Anna had moved away to a different city. It seemed she was trying to start over, to put as much distance between us as possible. According to those same friends, she had even found another stable to continue her riding. I couldn't say I was surprised. Horses had always been her obsession, even after everything that happened. But when I heard about it, a part of me couldn't let it go. The memories of that night at the stables came rushing back, and I felt that same anger bubbling to the surface. It wasn't enough that she had moved on. She needed to understand that her actions had consequences, real, lasting consequences that wouldn't just disappear because she had packed up and moved away. So, I decided to take action. I found the contact information for the new stable she had joined, and I sent them the same video I had shared before. I wrote a message, detailing what had happened, and made sure they knew exactly who they were dealing with. It wasn't about revenge at this point, it was about ensuring that she couldn't continue her twisted behavior in a new place. I wanted them to know the truth about her, to understand what she was capable of. She could move to a new city, but she couldn't escape what she had done. A few days later, my phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw Anna's name, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it. But something made me answer. I picked up the call, and immediately I was met with her frantic voice. She was crying, her words barely making sense as she begged me to explain why I had done what I did. She said I was ruining her life, that she was just trying to move on, and that I was making it impossible. Her voice was filled with desperation, and I could hear the fear in her words. It was the same fear she had tried to inflict on me, the same desperation she had left me with after everything that had happened. I let her finish, let her get all of her words out before I spoke. My voice was calm, almost detached, as I told her exactly what I thought. "Anna, this isn't about ruining your life," I said. "This is about making sure you understand that what you did has consequences. You hurt me in ways that I can't even begin to explain, and you thought you could just walk away from it all. But that's not how the world works. Every action has a consequence, and this is yours." She was silent on the other end, her breathing ragged as she tried to control her sobs. I could hear her trying to find the right words, but I wasn't interested in listening anymore. "You need to move on, Anna," I said. "You need to live your life and understand that this is the price you pay for the choices you made. I'm done with all of this, and I don't want to hear from you again. This is the last time we're having this conversation." I could hear her start to say something, but I ended the call before she could finish. There was nothing left to say. I had made my point, and it was time for both of us to move on. After the call ended, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't happiness, exactly, but it was a sense of closure that I hadn't felt before. Anna was gone from my life, and I had done everything I could to make sure she understood the consequences of her actions. There would be no more chances, no more opportunities for her to hurt me or anyone else. She was free to live her life, but she would have to do it knowing that her past would always be there, a reminder of the choices she had made. I knew that I had done what I needed to do. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about making sure that I could finally move forward, without the weight of her betrayal holding me back. The anger, the sadness, the pain, it was all still there, but it was beginning to fade. I had faced the truth, confronted it head-on, and now it was time to let go. I could finally start to rebuild, to focus on my own life, without the shadow of Anna looming over me. And that, I realized, was enough.